I remember the exact sound the front door made the morning he left, that soft, polite click, like someone closing a book gently to avoid waking the house. It was supposed to be a small noise in a small life, but in that moment it felt enormous. 10 years of marriage condensed into the space between that click and the heavy thud of the screen door. He packed a small duffel, kissed the kids on the forehead as if nothing was different, and told me, in the kindest voice he could find, that he needed time. He called it a break, like a comma in the middle of a sentence that would continue. I called it the sharpest punctuation mark of my life. For the first week, I floated, a kind of foxed paper caught in a slow current. I went through motions I had perfected over a decade: lunches packed, school pickups, bill pay autopilot. Everyone assumed the storm would pass. Friends hugged me and said, "Give him time." People go through phases. My mother sent casseroles and condolences wrapped in casseroles. But there was a part of me that knew, with a clarity that felt almost clinical, that this wasn't a phase. The things he had left unsaid had substance. The gaps in his stories had patterns. The silence at night had a shape. When the lawyer called to say we needed to meet, it turned from a private heartbreak into a series of documents and decisions. 10 years of shared expenses, of mortgage payments made side by side, of the bookshelf that held our wedding album, now had to be accounted for in legal language. My hands shook as I signed forms I didn't fully understand. The word separation looked small on the page, but felt like a chisel working at the sculpture of my life. The kids, oh, the kids. That was the jagged, daily business of moving forward. They were 7 and 10 at the time, with knees perpetually skinned and hearts already learning the vocabulary of grief. I remember sitting on the kitchen floor, Lego pieces between my legs, when my daughter asked, "Will he come back?" She said it like a homework question, precise and hopeful. I hugged her until the answer inside me softened into something honest. "I don't know, sweetheart. But we're going to be okay." Saying it felt like casting a stone into the water and waiting for a ripple to reach shore. The first night alone in our room was its own kind of cold. We had once shared breath and blankets and bad television shows. Now I turned on the small lamp and read until my eyes blurred, not from the words, but from the enormity of solitude. There was a private catalog of his absence, the empty coffee cup on the nightstand, the faint cologne on a sweater that no longer hung in the closet. I let myself grieve in small, ritualistic ways. I packed away his shirts, one drawer at a time. I left the plants I used to water together in their sunny spot until they, too, learned to stand alone. Practicality kept me from crumbling. I opened accounts in my name, made calls to the mortgage company, and laid out a budget that looked lean and determined on a spreadsheet. I remember the memo I typed that first week: essentials, kids, rent, school, electricity. Everything else moved down a tier and into a waiting list. There was embarrassment in admitting I would have to tighten the purse strings, pride in knowing I could do it. 10 years teaching me to steward a household turned out to be a surprisingly useful resume for a new stage of life. But the work that saved me, the unexpected lifeline, was finding my voice again. For a long time the conversation of my life had been in the plural: we, us, ours. And somewhere in the busyness of building a family, my own edges had softened. I couldn't remember the last time I did something solely because I wanted to, not because it fit into someone else's schedule. So, when sleep allowed, I started small. I took a photography class on Tuesday nights, a tiny rebellion that felt decadent. I read books that had nothing to do with parenting or laundry. I walked through neighborhoods I had never noticed, pointing my camera at doors, at light through glass, at stray cats lounging like kings. Community transformed the solitary ache into shared labor. My neighbor, Anna, began bringing my children lemonade after school without asking. She would drop by with a smile and a plate of something warm and murmur, "Call me when you need anything." My sister, who lived 2 cities away, came for a week and taught me how to braid my daughter's long hair without sobbing. There were support groups I had half dismissed as for other people that turned out to be quietly miraculous, a circle of women who had also been left, who had rosaries of practical advice and stories that made me feel less like an anomaly and more like a participant in an old, stubborn human resilience. The slow accumulation of small acts became my scaffolding. I woke earlier and made breakfasts with a kind of devotion I hadn't felt in years. I learned to manage the school calendar without a partner to share the load. I discovered the exact time the city bus stopped in front of the kids' school and how to time my afternoons so there was always someone to be there when they got off. The house no longer felt like a museum of shared memories, but a living organism that could be cared for by one steady hand. Work shifted, too. For years, I'd been in a job that paid decently and offered stability, but in the quiet moments, I realized how much it had numbed me. My professional life had become an echo chamber of meetings that led to more meetings. I wanted work that felt like growth, not just grinding. So I began to upskill. Online courses in project management on late nights between folding laundry, webinars about digital marketing when the kids were at piano practice. The first time my boss noticed and said, "You've been doing great," I felt ridiculous pleasure, as if someone had finally seen the edges of the person I had always been underneath my roles. There were setbacks, naturally. The ex called on a Tuesday and asked for more time with the children than the custody agreement allowed. The conversation left my stomach in knots and my phone in the freezer as a way to silence my own breath. I had to go to court once to fight for a fair arrangement, standing in a fluorescent room with a cup of bad coffee in my hand and a folder with my life inside it. It was humiliating and brave and, in a bureaucratic sort of way, freeing. The judge's voice was a flat, impartial instrument, and when the order was signed, it felt like a line in the sand that I could walk beside and begin to map anew. At night, when the house was still and the kids slept, I began to map dreams. Not wild, impossible fantasies, but small ones. An evening class in design. A tiny startup idea to sell handcrafted pillows I'd been making in spare moments. A plan to visit a city I'd only ever seen in magazines. These dreams were humble but fierce. They were the seeds of a life that leaned toward joy rather than collapsed under the weight of loss. The most important piece of rebuilding, the one I didn't anticipate, was learning to be gentle with myself. For a long time, I measured success in not crying today and getting to work on time. Those were valid, but not sufficient. Rebuilding required joy and play and the permission to fail. So I failed sometimes, I burned toast, I said the wrong thing at the school assembly, I cried in the shower, and I learned that failure didn't mean collapse. It meant I was trying. By the end of that first year, the house had shifted. Photos remained on the walls, but I rearranged them to include snapshots of new things. The kids with friends from school, a picture from the photography class where my blurry attempt at sunrise looked strangely like possibility. A postcard I'd sent myself from a small weekend trip. The calendar on the fridge became a mosaic of appointments I'd chosen: dentist, interview, pottery class, get-together with friends. The we had become I, and it was not loneliness, but a canvas. And somewhere in those careful strokes of everyday life, an ember of confidence grew. It glowed in the way I answered the phone, not with seconds of hesitation, but with a steady hello. It lived in the tuck of my chin and the way I crossed the street with the kids, not waiting but moving toward. My life didn't erase the years I had shared with him. It held them like a well-read book on a shelf. But I had written new pages, too, messy, imperfect pages that were mine alone. When I woke up the next morning, the house felt even emptier than before. His toothbrush was gone, his closet half empty, and the faint scent of his cologne still hung in the air like a cruel reminder. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the sunlight coming through the curtains, feeling as if time had stopped. At first, I thought maybe he needed space, maybe this was just a phase. I told myself he'd come back after realizing what he was throwing away. But days turned into weeks, and there was no sign of him. No messages. No calls. Nothing. Just silence. I still remember how the world outside seemed to move on while mine had completely fallen apart. I'd go to the grocery store, see couples laughing, families shopping together, and I'd feel this deep ache in my chest. Everyone else's life seemed so intact. And mine? It was like watching my reflection crack in slow motion. Bills began to pile up. We had always shared everything: rent, utilities, groceries. Without his contribution, I quickly realized how dependent I had become. My savings weren't much, just a few $100s meant for emergencies. But suddenly, life itself had become an emergency. I started applying for jobs, anything I could find. I hadn't worked in years because he always said, "You don't need to work, I'll take care of us." And I believed him. I spent a decade building our home, cooking, cleaning, taking care of every little thing. But now I was on my own. The first few interviews didn't go well. My resume was outdated, my confidence shaky. I remember one interviewer asking, "What have you been doing for the past 10 years?" And I just froze. Because how do you explain that you were building a life that someone else decided to destroy? But I didn't give up. I practiced every night in front of the mirror, pretending to be confident even when my voice trembled. And then, finally, I got a job at a small local bakery. It wasn't glamorous and the pay wasn't great, but it was mine. My first paycheck after all those years felt like a medal, proof that I could stand on my own 2 feet. The bakery became my refuge. The smell of fresh bread, the warmth of ovens, and the sound of morning chatter gave me purpose. My coworkers didn't know my story at first. They just saw me as the quiet new woman. But slowly, they became like family. One of them, an older lady named Rosa, once told me, "Sometimes God breaks us just enough so we can rebuild stronger." Those words stuck with me. Months passed, and something unexpected happened. The pain started to fade, not completely, but enough for me to breathe again. I started focusing on me for the first time in years. I joined a local gym, learned how to paint again, and reconnected with old friends I had lost touch with because my husband never liked them. It was during one of those quiet evenings at home, painting with music playing softly, that I realized something profound. I no longer missed him. I missed the idea of him, the version of him I had loved. But the real man? The one who walked away without a goodbye? I was finally ready to let him go. But life has a strange way of testing us just when we start to heal. One afternoon, while I was closing up the bakery, my phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something made me answer. "Hello." There was silence. Then a familiar voice, one I hadn't heard in over a year. "Hi, it's me." My heart stopped. For a moment, I thought I might faint. I hadn't prepared for this for him. "What do you want?" I managed to say, my voice steadier than I expected. "I just wanted to talk," he said softly. "I've made a mistake." I wanted to laugh. A mistake? Leaving me after 10 years, that wasn't a mistake, that was a decision. He went on, "Things didn't work out the way I thought. I've been thinking about us, about what we had." I didn't reply. I could hear him breathing, waiting for me to say something, maybe to forgive him, maybe to invite him back. But the silence between us was heavier than ever. Finally, I said, "You don't get to come back after destroying everything." He sighed. "I just thought." I cut him off. "You thought I'd be waiting for you. But you were wrong." And I hung up. My hands were shaking, but not from sadness, from power. For the first time, I realized that closure doesn't come from someone's apology. It comes from your own strength to move on without needing one. That night, I slept peacefully, truly peacefully, for the first time in years. I woke up the next morning feeling lighter, stronger, and more alive than I had in a decade. I started setting new goals. I saved money every month, enrolled in night classes for business management, and dreamed of one day opening my own bakery. Rosa encouraged me every step of the way, calling me the comeback queen. As I rebuilt my life, I learned to find joy in little things: morning coffee, fresh air, laughter with coworkers. I realized that happiness doesn't have to come from someone else's presence. Sometimes it blooms from your own survival. One evening, as I walked home with a bag of pastries, I saw a couple walking hand in hand, and for the first time, it didn't sting. I smiled, not because I was bitter, but because I had finally found peace in being alone. And then, one day, the past came knocking again. It was a quiet Sunday morning when I opened the bakery as usual. The sunlight poured through the glass windows, reflecting off the golden pastries neatly lined up on the counter. I was humming softly, lost in the rhythm of my new life, when I noticed someone standing outside. He was just standing there, hands in his pockets, watching me through the window. For a moment, I thought my mind was playing tricks on me. But as soon as he stepped inside, the air changed. It was him, my ex-husband. He looked older, tired. The confident man who once left me so easily now seemed smaller somehow. His clothes were wrinkled, his face pale. I froze, my heart thudding, but I didn't let it show. He walked up to the counter slowly, nervously. "Hi," he said quietly. I didn't respond right away. I just looked at him, the man who'd shattered my world, now standing in front of me in my bakery, the one I built from the ashes of what he destroyed. "What are you doing here?" I finally asked, keeping my tone steady. "I wanted to see you," he said, his eyes searching mine. "I've been trying to find you for months. You changed your number and I didn't know where else to go." I took a deep breath, wiping my hands on my apron. "You shouldn't have come." He sighed. "I know, but I just needed to talk. Please, just hear me out." I hesitated for a moment. Against my better judgment, I nodded toward an empty table. "You have 5 minutes." He sat down, and for a few seconds, neither of us spoke. I could hear the hum of the coffee machine, the soft music in the background, sounds that made up my new world, a world he didn't belong to anymore. "I made a mistake," he began. "I left because I thought I was missing something in life. I thought I wanted freedom, excitement. But everything I chased after, it was empty. The woman I left for? She left me within months. I lost everything, the house, the money, my peace. And the whole time, all I could think about was you." I listened silently. Part of me wanted to scream at him, to ask how he could just walk away after 10 years like it was nothing. But another part of me, the part that had healed, just felt detached. He leaned forward. "You were the best thing that ever happened to me. I was too stupid to see it. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I needed to tell you that I'm sorry." There it was, the apology I once cried for. The words I had begged for in my mind on sleepless nights. And now, hearing them out loud, they didn't bring me peace. They brought clarity. I looked him in the eye and said, "You're right. You don't deserve forgiveness. But I do deserve peace. And I already found it." He swallowed hard, his eyes glistening. "So that's it?" "Yes," I said simply. "That's it." He nodded slowly, tears forming, and whispered, "You look happy." "I am," I replied. He stood up, hesitated as if he wanted to say more, then quietly left. I watched him walk out the door, this time, not with pain or sadness, but with relief. He was finally gone, and I finally understood that my happiness never depended on him returning. Later that day, Rosa came in and noticed I was quieter than usual. "You okay, dear?" she asked, handing me a cup of tea. I smiled faintly. "Yeah, I just closed a chapter." She gave me a knowing look. "Then it's time to start a new one." And that's exactly what I did. Over the next few months, I poured all my energy into expanding the bakery. Word spread fast, and soon we were getting more customers than we could handle. I began dreaming bigger, of opening a second branch, maybe even creating a brand. For the first time in years, I wasn't surviving, I was thriving. Then one afternoon, a customer came in who would unknowingly change the course of my story again. He was tall, polite, with kind eyes and a warm smile. He introduced himself as Daniel, a local business consultant who had recently moved to town. He said he loved supporting small businesses and had heard great things about my bakery. We started chatting about coffee blends and business strategies. What struck me most was how easy it was to talk to him, no tension, no judgment, no history. Just two people sharing ideas and laughter. Over time, Daniel became a regular. He'd stop by every morning before work, always ordering the same thing, a cappuccino and a chocolate croissant. One morning, he brought me flowers and said, "For the best baker in town." I laughed, blushing for the first time in years. I wasn't looking for love. In fact, I was scared of it. But Daniel didn't rush me. He respected my space, my past, my healing. He once told me, "You don't have to be ready for me. Just be ready for yourself." Those words touched something deep inside me. One evening, we closed the bakery together after a busy day. As we sat on the front steps watching the sunset, he said softly, "You know, you talk about your past like it's a scar. But scars mean you survived." That night, I realized he was right. My story wasn't about heartbreak anymore, it was about rebirth. Months later, Daniel and I started dating. It felt different this time, calm, real, and mutual. No one was walking ahead or behind. We were side by side. One day, while baking together in the kitchen, he asked, "Do you ever think about the man who left?" I smiled, rolling out dough. Sometimes. But only to thank him, because if he hadn't walked out, I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't be me. He nodded, grinning. Then I guess his biggest mistake became your greatest gift. I laughed, because it was true. My past had once broken me, but now it was the foundation I stood proudly on. I had learned to rebuild, not just my life, but my soul. And as I stood there, surrounded by the aroma of fresh bread and the laughter of a man who saw me for who I had become, I realized something beautiful. Sometimes, losing everything is the only way to find yourself. Life, as I had come to learn, doesn't always go according to plan, but sometimes that's the best thing that could ever happen to you. A year after my ex-husband walked back into the bakery and out again for the last time, my life was completely different. The bakery had grown beyond my imagination. I had hired 4 employees, including 2 young girls who reminded me of myself when I was starting over, unsure, but determined. Every morning I'd walk in, greeted by the comforting scent of cinnamon, coffee, and freshly baked bread. The place felt alive, laughter, music, the hum of people sharing their stories over pastries. It was more than a business now. It was a space of healing for me and for others. One morning, as I was finishing the day's accounts, Daniel came in with a mischievous grin on his face. "Close early today," he said. "Why?" I laughed. "We still have 2 hours left, and people are lined up outside." "Because," he said, holding up a picnic basket, "you, my dear, deserve a break." I stared at him in disbelief. "You planned a picnic?" He grinned. "Maybe." I sighed, pretending to be annoyed, but smiling anyway. "Fine. Just let me tell Rosa to take over." An hour later, we were sitting by the lake outside town, the same lake where I used to go alone after my husband left. But now I wasn't alone. The water sparkled under the golden sunlight, and the breeze carried laughter from people nearby. As we sat on a blanket, Daniel handed me a cup of homemade lemonade. "You know," he said softly, "you've come a long way." I looked at the lake, my reflection rippling in the water. Sometimes I still can't believe it. 2 years ago, I thought my life was over. I thought I'd never feel whole again. He reached over, gently taking my hand. "You didn't just survive, you rebuilt. You didn't wait for someone to save you. You saved yourself." I smiled, my eyes glistening. Maybe that's the secret, stop waiting to be saved. For a while, we sat there in silence, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. I felt a peace I hadn't known before. Not the kind that comes from forgetting the past, but from making peace with it. Later that night, back at home, I found myself flipping through an old photo album. There were pictures from my wedding day, smiling faces, promises, a woman who thought love meant losing herself for someone else. I didn't cry this time. I simply closed the album and put it away, knowing that chapter was complete. A few weeks later, something unexpected happened. A local newspaper featured my bakery in a Women Who Rebuilt Their Lives series. They wrote about my journey, how I turned heartbreak into hope, pain into passion. The article went viral online, and messages began pouring in from women all over the country. Some shared how they were going through divorces, some had lost jobs, others had lost faith in themselves. And each message said something similar: "Your story gave me hope." That was the moment I realized my journey wasn't just mine anymore, it was a light for others too. Daniel encouraged me to start small workshops for women who wanted to learn baking or just needed a safe space to talk. Every Sunday, we'd gather in the bakery after closing hours. Women would share their stories over cups of coffee, laugh, cry, and sometimes sit in silence, but always together. One evening, after a workshop, a young woman named Claire stayed behind. She looked nervous as she said, "I read your story online. My husband left me last year. I've been so lost, but seeing you smile today gives me hope that maybe I can smile again too." I hugged her tightly. "You will. One day, you'll look back and realize this pain was just a beginning." That night, when everyone had gone home, I turned off the bakery lights and stood in the quiet glow of the street lamps outside. My reflection in the glass window looked back at me stronger, softer, wiser. A life rebuilt not from revenge, not from bitterness, but from courage. Months later, Daniel took me out to dinner, a small restaurant overlooking the city lights. We laughed, talked, and reminisced about how far we'd both come. Then, as dessert arrived, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. My heart skipped. He opened it slowly. Inside was a simple, elegant ring. Nothing flashy, nothing extravagant. Just real. He looked into my eyes and said, "I know you've rebuilt your world from the ground up. And I don't want to take anything from you. I want to build the next chapter with you. Will you marry me?" Tears filled my eyes, not because I was caught off guard, but because of what it represented. He wasn't rescuing me. He was joining me. I smiled through my tears and whispered, "Yes." The restaurant erupted in gentle applause, and he slipped the ring on my finger. That night, as we drove home, I looked out at the passing city lights and thought about how far life had taken me. From the day he walked out of our marriage, I had thought my story ended. But the truth was that day was just my beginning. When we got home, I stood in front of the mirror, the ring gleaming softly in the light. It wasn't just a symbol of love, it was a reminder that I had survived, healed, and found joy again. I smiled to myself and whispered, "You did it." Because sometimes, the most powerful revenge isn't anger, or tears, or payback, it's happiness. Genuine, peaceful, unshakable happiness. The kind that doesn't need validation. The kind that comes from knowing who you are and never losing her again. So, to the man who once walked out and thought he broke me, thank you. Because you didn't break me. You built me. And now, as I wake every morning beside a man who loves me for my strength, not in spite of it, I know the truth. Sometimes, losing the wrong person is exactly how you find the right version of yourself.